of the Emory Institute for the Study of Modern Israel, I'd like to thank Evan Goldberg and Holly Smetko and the Howie Institute for their arrangements for today, and to Emory University President Jim Wagner and Gary Haupt for facilitating the talk this afternoon. We're fortunate to have with us today one of the world's leading historians on the modern Middle East, not to mention also Israel's ambassador to the United States. In April of 1947, the United Nations set up a commission called UNSCOP, United Nations Special Committee on Palestine. Its purpose was, like previous commissions that visited Palestine, to investigate underlying causes of the communal disturbances, make political recommendations. After going to Palestine, UNSCOP issued its report in September. There was a debate about whether there should be a UN trusteeship, but then it was suggested that there be a partition of Palestine into Arab and Jewish states, each of the proposed states consisting of 3 segments with their respective segments barely touching each other. A minority UNSCOP report suggested the federal solution, that is, there be one state for both peoples. When the partition report was offered, the Arab reaction was unequivocal, swift, and totally opposed. The political committee of the Arab League suggested that economic sanctions be imposed. Britain and the US said no. Moreover, the Arab Higher Committee and Arab supporters of this Palestinian Arab body not only rejected partition, but they rejected the federal solution as well. Chaim Weizmann, the would-be first president of the State of Israel, pled the Zionist case to Harry Truman. When the partition vote was voted on November 29, 1947, 63 years ago today, the US voted yes, along with the USSR, France, while the British delegate abstained. The vote was 33-13, 10 abstentions. It obtained its required 2/3 majority. According to that UN partition plan of 1947, it was supposed to be an Arab and Jewish state. Roughly half the state, half the area of Palestine was to be Jewish, and the other half was to be Arab, about 13,000 square kilometers each. Arab states and the Palestinians rejected any partition. By the end of the 1948 war, Israel, the Jewish state, had increased its size by 37%. In other words, had there not been a war, Israel would not have, or the Jewish state would not have increased its size by 37%. The rest of the 5,600 square kilometers were controlled by Jordan and Egypt. And those areas were then later on controlled by Israel as a result of the June 1967 war. Not a war by Israel's choosing. Israel found itself in control of all the land that was once Palestine. It is this 20% that is now being discussed for the establishment of the Palestinian state. Decisions made in history have consequences and implications. Likewise, decisions not made also have consequences. Choosing not to accept the partition plan, the division of Palestine into Arab and Jewish states, had a fateful consequence for Arabs and for Jews. As Michael Oren points out in his magisterial work on the June 1967 war, and I do not get a commission for hawking his book, as Michael points out in his book, the decision by President of Egypt Sadat, President of Egypt Nasser, to go to war in 1967 had a fateful impact on the Arab world. It changed the nature of the Arab-Israeli conflict. It changed the nature of modern Israel. It changed the nature of the Israeli-Palestinian relationship. More recently, Israeli Prime Minister Sharon, Omer, and Netanyahu have, with certain caveats, supported the idea of, again, a 2-state solution. Sometimes history does repeat itself. One for Arabs, and one for Arabs, Muslims, Christians, and one for Jews, a Jewish state. Over the last 63 years, Zionists and Israelis have looked to the U.S. for political support, sometimes as Israel struggled for legitimacy, recognition, and acceptance. The relationship with Washington has been frosty, rocky, contentious, sometimes warm, sometimes affable, and often mutually beneficial. We are fortunate to have with us both the historian of the conflict and the practitioner of negotiations with us today, Michael Oren. Michael Oren was born in upstate New York. His father was an officer in the U.S. Army who took part in the D-Day invasion of Normandy in 1944 and fought in the Korean War. In 1977, Michael Oren completed his undergraduate degree from Columbia University. He continued his studies at Columbia with a master's in international affairs in 1978 from the School of International Public Affairs. In 1979, he immigrated to Israel. A few years later, he returned to the United States, where he enrolled at Princeton University, receiving his PhD in 1986. In 1979, Ambassador Oren joined the Israel Defense Forces. He served as a paratrooper in the 82 Lebanon War. During the 1991 Gulf War, he was Israeli liaison officer to the U.S. Fleet. During the 2008-2009 Israel-Gaza conflict, he was a media relations officer. In 2006, Michael Oren was a visiting professor at Harvard and Yale University. He continued teaching at Yale in 2007. In May 2009, Ambassador Oren was appointed Ambassador of Israel to the United States by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, succeeding Sally Merida. He's written 2 magisterial books about the Middle East. One, 6 Days of War, and the second, Power, Faith, and Fantasy, America in the Middle East, 1776 to the present. It is great personal pleasure, professional delight, to introduce Ambassador Michael Oren, who will address us today on the topic, the U.S.-Israel Alliance and Historical and Personal Perspective. Ambassador Michael Oren.
Thank you, Professor Stein. I was enjoying the history lecture. I was hoping to keep on going. Vice President Hawk, my dear colleague, esteemed colleague, the Consul General, Oren, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming out on this great Atlanta day. But nice to tell me it's sunny back in Washington. Believe it, the other way around. Well, I see that not everybody here is a student, but if you are a student, I guarantee you by the time you graduate, you'll hear at least one time, if not during your commencement ceremony, you'll hear like you should go out and follow your dream. Right? So if you haven't heard that yet, you're going to hear it today for the first time. Go out and follow your dream. As you heard briefly from Professor Stein, I was born up in upstate New York, but I, at a very young age, about 2 months, moved to the state of New Jersey. And I think I spend more time as ambassador defending the state of New Jersey than I do defending the state of Israel. If you have any tough questions about New Jersey, I'll be happy to answer them later. But I had a dream. Growing up in New Jersey, I had a dream. I felt myself exquisitely privileged to be growing up at a time in Jewish history when not only was there a flourishing and vibrant Jewish community in the greatest nation on earth, but there also happened to be an independent Jewish state. And growing up in the immediate aftermath of the Holocaust, which occurred because there was no Jewish state, I felt myself inestimably privileged to be growing up at such a time and having the opportunity to go to that state. So from the earliest age, and I'm talking quite early, I had this dream that I was going to move to Israel and become part of this extraordinary opportunity in Jewish history. And so, again, at an early age, I went off to a kibbutz, tried my hand at alfalfa growing, quite a hand, and came back to America to complete my education, joined a Zionist youth movement, and it was the height of our experience in the Zionist movement was to go to Washington and to meet with American officials, but the height of our visit to Washington was a meeting with the ambassador of Israel to the United States of America. And I'll never forget, it was a Saturday night, and we're in this Fleabag hotel somewhere in Washington, and in walks the ambassador from Israel to the United States, and we stood in our chairs, and we clapped till our hands were numb, and we sang Shalom Aleichem, and it was really the height of my 15-year-old life at that point, and I thought to myself right then, that's what I want to be when I grow up. Someday I'd like to do what he does. His name was Yitzhak Rabin. And later on I had also the inestimable privilege working for him in the early 90s as an advisor and working on the beginning of the peace process, the end of which we hope to see in the coming years, the conclusion of which, and I'll in greater detail talk about this, with the creation of a Palestinian state living side by side with the state of Israel in the position of permanent and legitimate peace. So this was my dream, and some of you who are taking Professor Stein's course, or have, know that it is perhaps the founding vision of the father of modern Zionism, Theodor Herzl, who said, "If you will it, it is no dream." It's sort of emblazoned on many walls and public buildings in the state of Israel. If you will it, it is no dream. Every time I hear that axiom, I'm reminded of a corollary that was coined not by a Zionist, not by a Jew even, by the great Irish poet William Butler Yeats, who said, "In dreams begin responsibilities." And I've always thought that that is the definition of Zionism. Zionism is about Jewish responsibility. Zionism is about Jews taking responsibility for themselves as Jews, responsibility for their lampposts, responsibility for their electrical systems, their sewage systems, responsibility for our successes, but also responsibility for our setbacks.